Dartmouth area, a growing part of our province. And once we saw the benefits of the Provincial Health Authority and to have people come from other areas that could benefit from surgery and services there. Now they do orthopedic work for people with a fairly far reach on a pretty regular basis. So I'm pleased to say that Dartmouth General was well in scope. In many ways, we were probably hoping to have Dartmouth General finished and have 48 additional beds, 4 additional surgeries, all 8 theatres being of course, a modern style. And size in particular is very, very big. It was interesting hearing Dr. David Kirkpatrick speak about the general size of an OR that we currently would have at the VG or even at the Halifax Infirmary. And when that team is in the OR and you have your residents, you have nurses in training to be OR nurses, he said it's pretty well full. And so there's some new requirements around the size of ORs, so they'll be up to the highest standard. But it was our thinking at first that we could get Dartmouth in place and then start the new work at the Halifax Infirmary. But now they will go in parallel. The need is so strong after the problems that became very severe with the flood. We know that the hospital itself is on life support to some degree, and so moving the whole project now as quickly as possible is what is in the plan.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I know the answer to this question, but in the current budget, is there anything in that current budget here that we have that incorporates the $132 million?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And what I can convey to the member is that the full amount for the design, which will finish in summer, is included in the budget, and a small amount towards getting construction underway. The goal certainly is to have some work as we escalate this project, to have some work underway in early 2017. By the time the final design comes in and we get it out to tender, that's the goal at this stage. And as I did say earlier, the design is on time, and it'll put us in a good position to get this project underway.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the NDP.
I'm just wondering, if you could point out that...
Order, please.
Oh, sorry.
Please.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Direct your questions through the Chair.
I wonder if the Minister could just point out to me in the budget line where that would be reflected for the Dartmouth General Hospital, please.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to our member. The hospital infrastructure contains the dollars that will be allocated, and that's on page 1314, Health and Wellness budget estimates. It's in that envelope of money that the work for Dartmouth General is contained.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. Has the RFP been developed, and if it is it available? Could it be made available?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And looping back to the previous question asked, the design, of course, we're into a Class B, which puts us on the edge of construction. And in checking in with the architects and the company there, they are on time with this work, but it needs a final. Is it rendition, maybe the word? But it needs that final draft before an RFP would be developed in order to contain all the specifications for the build. So that's not being formulated at this point.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in the lead up to the announcement on October 14th, obviously, I'm sure a lot of planning took place on cost analysis, timelines, etc. I'm wondering if the minister could indicate to me if that information could be made available.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Chair, and what I want to be able to present to the member is that the amount of the project, the scale, the projection was that envelope of 132 million. Nothing has changed since then. But you know, that detail of cost analysis really comes after we get the final design, because then there's a check back on what the cost analysis will be. There's actually, I think very often it's actually an independent look at are those costs in line with the projections.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess maybe I should frame my question, but I'm thinking that in coming up with a plan in October that would go over 5 years and the cost of $132 million, there would have had to have been some planning, and that's essentially what I would be interested in seeing, if the minister could provide that.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And you know, the general figure was put out there to certainly give everybody the assurance that in order to do the 5th floor and build a tower, this is that you know, ballpark. It was not based on any detailed design at that stage. What we do know What we do know is that there's a general cost for a square footage of a hospital plan, and so this provides that ballpark figure that we put forward.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I feel a little bit worried by that answer, as I expect there would have been quite a bit of consultation that would have taken place and concerted efforts toward putting forward a plan to reach that. But at this point, I will move on in my questions. I do want to ask the Minister about the Dartmouth General Hospital Foundation, and I believe you probably addressed some of the questions that I did have through...
Order, please. Please recognize...
Through
the Chair. Thank you. The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party.
What's that? You're saying you.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to ask the Minister questions in relation to the Dartmouth General Hospital Foundation. Essentially, I think it was alluded that the Minister alluded to a standard 25-75 ratio with foundations, and noting that there could be some flexibility as to with a project of this size with the foundation. What I wanted to ask the Minister, though, when the foundation takes over and the responsibility for that particular wing I had alluded to earlier, I believe that was primarily the foundation that had done that work. Does that contribution from the foundation show up in this budget?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, that wouldn't show up as part of the budget. Never has. And you know, looking forward, having met with the board, you know, I know they'll do a great job in coming to an agreement with the NSHA in terms of what they will arrive at for a goal and target in terms of their fundraising. So far, every indication is that the very early conversations they're pleased with. They have noted to us that everything is at a good place for them. Both, you know, the work at Dartmouth General, the work at Halifax Infirmary, we know is of a scale that they, in recent memory, they haven't had to work to achieve. But I think that that right balance of that the NSHA will recognize what the community is able to raise, as well as I believe based on you know, current fundraising in the community, and as the community becomes aware of the tremendous enhancement of their general hospital, I think we'll again see what Nova Scotians often do, and that is rise to the challenge before them.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to discuss the EIBI program that the Minister had referred to in his opening comments, and the Minister's indicated that $3.6 million has been committed to this program. My question in relation to this for the Minister is, does his department have data comparing the EIBI results for children who received services before the age of 4 versus those who received it after the age of 4?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And the member raises a wonderful and timely question. This is a program I'm very, very familiar with, as I worked with VAST, Valley Autism, society when I first became a member, and the Valley was one of the first areas to get EIBI funding, and then of course it's, as we know, moved across the province. But one of the areas that the IWK team is very interested in is, you know, we do hear that the earlier the intervention, you know, the better the outcomes. And so whether it's best with a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, or a 5-year-old, if we think about it, you know, it's only natural to think in terms of a 3-year-old and the language development they have versus a 4-year-old and language development, which is a very, very big part of a requirement of someone on the autism spectrum. So the IWK now, in fact, is looking at the program and what is the level of the intense therapy that is required, and trying to do this more on an individual basis as opposed to saying that a child needs, you know, 8 months of intensive therapy, and you know, how much training and involvement with parents, with daycare centers as well, because the best results that I hear about is when, in fact, there is a wider amount of work going on than just a therapist. So the IWK now, under their program, is wanting to get more identification. Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? The one area that they've been able to determine conclusively is that absolutely before a child goes to school. And that's why, you know, when we started government 2.5 years ago, and, you know, it had been continuous pretty well all along, but there was an immediate need to look after 5.5-year-olds who were ready for school, and parents did keep their children home till they had the EIBI. Some, however, some parents saw, oh, they're at the chronological age. Let's put them. Let's get our child in school, not having the program. And there was a marked difference between those who get EIBI before going to school and those then that enter school without the program. So the commitment now, and this is why the extra $3.6 million, is to have you know, enough therapists trained, so that we will be able to offer every child on the autism spectrum EIBI before they go to school. You know, everybody is indicating earlier the better. The IWK want to put a bit more science behind that, and that's part of their project work right now.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not an area that I am overly familiar with, although I've had conversations with constituents in relation to it, and there does seem to be a pretty strong belief that the earlier the intervention, the better. As I guess with any early intervention is better for any of the childhood conditions that might emerge. And I believe there's some concern about whether the $3.6 million will actually target children even younger. I believe that some psychologists feel that starting with just before children enter school, sometimes it's difficult to see if it was the EIBI program or if it was just the increased socialization that the child had access to once in school. So it does seem to be of a concern. I think that the programs be geared toward even children at even a younger age. So I'm not sure if I'm getting from your response about the IWK if that is part of the target to provide the EIBI program with these funds to children who are below the age of 4.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The monies in the budget this year, of course, are in addition to what previous governments have been putting in place. So this is going to position us to now guarantee that all children on the autism spectrum will get the EIB program before going to school. And again, you know, research will be part of the decision in terms of, you know, getting it in earlier years. In some ways, it depends on what part of the province you're in as well. In some parts of the province, we would have 4-year-olds getting the EIBI program. I've been in a couple of homes just to get a sense of what the therapist is doing, what functions are they performing to again have the children benefit from the intervention. And so I know that we'll continue to take the best lead and information from the IWK, you know, heading up the program across the province. One of the areas that was a problematic and a deficit in the program was having, you know, needing more therapists. And that's part of where the $3.6 million, it will be the training and the pay for those therapists as we work to reduce the age when a child will be getting the EIBI.
The Honourable Leader in the House of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just 2 final questions for the Minister, and if I may, I'll ask them at the same time. First, I'm wondering if the $3.6 million increase is primarily for training, and secondly, is there a budget breakdown available for the EIBI program?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We can get that information in a detailed fashion, but I know it is both training and certainly a lot for the human resources that will be needed to deliver the program.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to get right into a couple questions. I know there are trauma-specific therapy services offered to sexual violence survivors in, I believe, in Antigonish and then through Avalon Sexual Assault Center. And I know that there's some concern that, or uncertainty, sorry, Mr. Chairman, that these critical therapist positions should be under the operational budget or funded through the budget for operating budget. I wonder if the Minister could indicate if there's funding in this year's budget to make sure that those trauma-specific therapy services can get direct funding from the department.
The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. There is money budgeted for those 2 centres. There is an additional $750,000 that will be for a provincial coordinator, as well as getting the site in Cape Breton and in western part of the province up and running during this fiscal year.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to quickly go back to a couple questions within long-term care, and then of course I'll move on. I know we were on that topic in my last hour. Just wondering, I know I asked the Minister in question period, and hopefully he found out some more information, and it was around the transitional care beds at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital. I believe there's 18. There's 11 rooms, but 18 beds. And I asked the minister if he was aware that those beds would be closing in the fall. I wonder if the minister has found any information and be able to maybe tell us if those transitional beds at Cape Breton Regional Hospital will be closed. And we heard the reason was to expand the OR capacity there. So I'm just wondering if the minister could give us some information on those.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and again, being on that operational side of the ledger and checking with staff, there haven't been any conversations around those particular beds and in terms of having closures occur. I would consider those in that category of the clinical services review, and we certainly may hear more from the NSHA.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one of the reasons why is that patients within and staff within those transitional beds are concerned. Of course, I indicated the long wait list for long-term care placements in Cape Breton. It seems to be the highest in the province, that region. So I would hope that is not the case, and if it is the case, then a plan is in place, and hopefully the minister can provide that with us. Quickly on the VAC beds, or the Veterans Affairs beds in the province, I know they're situated throughout nursing homes, that the federal government fund those beds, and similar to the Veterans Hospital here, or Veterans Wing over at the just next to the QE2. Has there been any indication from the federal government yet if they're going to divest themselves of those beds? If not, has the minister brought that up with the federal government on? Because it could be a potentially budgetary pressure in the future. So I'm wondering if any information from the federal government, if they're going to transition those beds and give them up, so the province may have to find some funding to support the long-term care facilities that actually have those beds in them currently.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I can inform the member in this regard is that we've had an initial conversation. Ruby Knowles had informed me that they were starting some conversations around the veterans' beds, and again at this point, no decision. The reality is, of course, coming at us in that now we do have some veterans' beds that are not filled by veterans. And so what of the future? I believe the federal government is making a plan for when the day comes. There'll be no Second World War or Korean conflict veterans, and we know every day there are less veterans that could occupy one of these facilities. So it's important that at least the initial stages of knowing what the federal government's plan is. There's been a lot of ask, of course, to the federal government to look at current members of the armed forces and those that were in some of our special conflicts in the 20th and early 21st century. But that's an unknown at this stage as to what Veterans Affairs Canada will do.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would hope. I know the minister mentioned less veterans under the definition of the federal government's veterans, and that's of course Korea, pre-Korea, the World Wars, and of course we know, and all of us know, that there are many veterans now that I think the federal government needs to step up to the plate and make a commitment to support them, because the province will have to pick that cost up. The province will have to ensure that the current day veteran are taken care of under our healthcare system. So if the minister needs an ally to push the federal government to maybe look at that definition, he can definitely count on our support in our caucus. I want to turn to EHS now. I'm just wondering if the minister is aware, or can the minister confirm that EHS, EMC, the defibrillators that are used now on the ambulances are LifePak 12s. Can the minister confirm or give some details on that there's going to be a new distributor of LifePaks in the province, going from LifePak 12 to a company called Zoll? I wonder if the minister can indicate if that is true, and then that's going to happen in the future as we move forward on changing and upgrading the LifePak 12 or the 12 leads that we have on our ambulances across Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and probably an area that the member for Sackville-Cobequid is very familiar with indeed. So what has taken place is that this procurement has gone through internal services and has gone to tender to establish purchase or lease standing offer contracts with qualified proponents. So the negotiations hadn't quite been complete by March the 31st, but they will be confirmed during 16-17.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
So it's my understanding that yes, that procurement process is within internal services, but definitely some concerns, and I'm hearing from medics from across the province on the transition from a LifePak to a Zoll unit. And a LifePak 12 is what is there. It's a 12 lead capability. There is, from my understanding, there was a committee of paramedics and those within the EHS field that I think, from my understanding, were very supportive of going to a LifePak 15, which is just an upgrade of what the unit is now being used across the province. When we change, and when the government, if they decide to change to a Zoll unit, every single paramedic will need to be retrained. I would believe there'd be a significant cost to that, and there's some concerns with that. So is the minister aware of what that cost may be to do the training, so that the paramedics in our ground ambulance service are familiar with this unit? And it's a different unit. There'll be a significant training to learn about this new unit, when an upgrade from a LifePak 12 to a LifePak 15 could have, I think, been put in place much easier and potentially costs money on the retraining.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think the Minister of Internal Services wants to join the conversation here, but maybe that's for question period tomorrow. But no, one of my understanding is that when a new piece of equipment is brought into service, that training is part of that contract. But I don't have that final details. The member does raise a very, very good point that if this new piece of equipment is considerably different, my hope is that you know, it's every bit of the quality and of the ability for paramedics to quickly access, use. Yes, training is always necessary, and I know paramedics, you know, whenever there's a small change, they make sure that they are 100% knowledgeable about what the equipment can do, how you get it up to speed when it is when there's something new. Because I'm well aware of some of the continuous training that paramedics, you know, do have as part of professional development. But in terms of the cost here, we'll have to scope that out.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope the minister and the deputy go back and try to maybe get more information on some of the concerns. So that was one that I brought up. The other is the capability of the age limit that the Zoll unit compared to a LifePak unit when you're dealing with doing 12 leads, for example. The protocol now, I believe, the LifePak 12 can do a 12 lead on a 16-year-old, but the Zolls, the cutoff age is 18. So you're maybe potentially missing a couple of years of doing tests on younger patients that might have cardiac conditions. The other concern that people are bringing to my attention, and I brought it up with Janet Knox at the meeting I had, was the capability and the compatibility when ambulances go into ERs across the province. Right now, if you have a 12 lead or even a defibrillator patches on, you can just unplug it, plug it right into units that are in the ERs now, and continue on. The concern is that there needs to be some adaptation going on, that you might have to take those patches off, those leads off, replace one. That takes some time, and Ms. Knox was unaware of it, was concerned because of course she said there is a committee set up within the health authority to mitigate when technology changes happen, and wasn't aware of this. So I'm concerned that with potentially being in internal services where it's purely a procurement type of issue, they're not connecting the dots with what's actually happening in the field, what's happening in the hospitals, because there's different organizations overseeing all this. So I hope the member or the minister can clarify some of this. Hopefully, come forward and ensure that the medics who are bringing these concerns to my attention, some of these can be looked at, and you know, hopefully we're not going down the wrong road. So I'm just wondering if I can get a commitment from the minister to go back and look into this and provide me with some of the information and concerns and a response with the concerns I have. I'm more than happy to discuss this after we're done this, to make sure that the continuity of care from our ground air ambulance continues on when they enter an emergency room or a hospital setting.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member for bringing forth his concerns, and I certainly regard his professional perspective, but also he's gathered information from a number of paramedics in the field. In terms of procurement, you know, you know, it's certainly well known that professional health personnel are consulted, but he does raise a number of issues here that I think need to be addressed, and it's one that I'll commit to having addressed, to make sure that those who will use the equipment, those that will have a handoff of patients in terms of being monitoring, and we'll certainly get some of this information as quickly as possible.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Great, thank you, and I do appreciate that. Though the one thing I did forget about, and I've mentioned this before, and on some of the on pathology testing that we send out of the country, Zoll is their headquarters is in the U.S., And that was another issue brought up where paramedics in the field can transmit tests I might not have the technical terms right, but send a test to some kind of holding area that gets transmitted to hospitals, cardiologists, all that. From my understanding, with Zoll, if they're the winners of this tender, that information could be held within the U.S., which opens up privacy concerns around the Patriot Act and the ability for the U.S. government to look at that information without the knowledge of Nova Scotians and the patients. So, we can put the laws in place in Nova Scotia and in Canada, but once that information goes across the border, then we lose control of that, and that was another concern. So I don't need an answer on that, but that's another area hopefully we can get an answer to. CECs, Collaborative Emergency Centres, was something that, of course, we're very supportive of. We know that there hasn't been any announcements or any real information on if the government's going to move forward with opening new CECs. They did do a review, Mr. Chairman, which I think were favorable to what CECs have been able to accomplish. And the one that stands out, I think, is in Lunenburg, where there has been issues with closure. I wonder if the minister could give us an update. Is the government committed to move down that road, or are they putting the brakes on? And specifically, what about fishermen in Lunenburg? Are we ever going to see it there? I know there were some issues within the medical field itself. So I'm just wondering if the minister could give us an update on commitment to CECs and possibly seeing more of them in our province, specifically maybe the one that was supposed to open in Lunenburg.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And what I can say specifically to Lunenburg is that it is tied in as part of I guess within the zone, but for the South Shore area. It's tied into a redevelopment of emergency care. There is going to be some construction needed. Work on that project is underway. There's monies allocated for it. Certainly Lunenburg, even, I think as the clinical service review may have some further statements to make, but Lunenburg certainly is one of those areas that has the requirement for some version of CEC, and we know that CEC has different iterations in different parts of the province in terms of how long they are open on a particular day and how they are human resource, whether with a primary or an advanced care paramedic. So Lunenburg is certainly part of that picture of development.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I look forward to trying to get some of that information and potentially in this year's budget maybe is there a specific dollar amount that the minister could point to that work, or even roughly a figure of what's being allocated for the South Shore. And I don't know if it's called the South Shore Zone. I'm not too sure of the 4 zones, but that zone, I wonder if you could be specific maybe on a dollar figure.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And what I can convey to the member is that there is there's a line item in the budget for CEC development. And I'll get what could be applied to that area.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the Minister and his staff. Just quickly on when I mentioned pathology, of course, last year, I believe it was well over $1 million, or roughly $1 million, was spent on sending some of our pathology tests stateside. So I'm wondering, in this year's budget, is that figure or that amount constant? I wonder if the minister could indicate how much money is allocated for those additional tests being sent to Minnesota, I believe, or the U.S., and just give us a brief update on, is that going to continue to be the practice for the next year?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And what I can inform the member is that those details are within the Nova Scotia Health Authority budget. They'll soon be passing their budget. In fact, at their next meeting, it's all complete. There's a couple of, I think, very relevant factors here. Part of the cost to us is really what we had been doing for Newfoundland, so we had to send theirs on as well as part of that. So we get reimbursed, and I'm pleased to say that we have hired 2 new hemopathologists to carry out our work here in the province. So that obviously dramatically reduces our cost as well.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, and I assume that the budget for the the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK will be approved soon. With that, one of the questions, I read an article, and it was from the former Deputy Minister, talking about the district health, or district, I keep saying district, but the Nova Scotia Health Authority, and the openness of the board, their board meetings, and wondering if there has been any consideration to follow suit like South Shore Health did a number of years ago, to have those meetings open to the public. Of course, realizing that at times there is sensitive information that need to be discussed in camera, and personnel matters, and preparing for the budget. Completely understand why that would not be something we could have open to the public until it was approved. So, wondering if the minister has given any direction to the Nova Scotia Health Authority that would require them to have open board meetings, so that the public, the media, Nova Scotians can see what's going on within those meetings.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We go back here to the old district format. It's my understanding that South Shore was the only board that had regular open meetings to the public. Many of the other districts would have an annual meeting where they would present highlights of their year's work, and reference some of the budget allocations, but it was not on a regular basis. The Health Authority is actually considering what direction they will go in terms of having some public engagement. Again, having more Nova Scotians know about the work of the board, and I think it's at a good place after a year of being up and functioning. So I'm sure we'll hear that in the coming year.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. See, when we have short answers, short questions, we get some information exchange going on. So this last one I have to ask. It comes from the Bill Esterbrooks of MLAs on cost of things. So of course, with the amalgamation, there's a cost to the branding, to an example of new business cards, new letterheads, new signage. Can the minister give us a figure? If it's not today, can he provide a figure of the cost of that utilizing a new name, Nova Scotia Health Authority? Is not, capital district. So there should have, I would assume there's a significant cost there. I wonder if the minister could provide us that cost, if not today, later when they can compile that. I would assume they're keeping track of that.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and that will be one of those numbers that will be made available with the passing of the Nova Scotia Health Authority budget. What I am aware of is that yes, when any new entity gets underway, there are those new costs, and they cover a wide variety of requirements, but I know in terms of how they function on a day-to-day basis, week over week, they have been very, very conscious of what things cost, how they spend money. The final budget will be, I think, one very deeply appreciated by Nova Scotians, and we'll get those details and breakdown of what their budget line items look like.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
So in the last few minutes that I have, I'm going to go to an area that's very dear to me, and that's of course PTSD and coverage for first responders. I know it's not in the minister's wheelhouse, but we've had exchange on the floor of the House, talking about presumptive coverage, talking about extending coverage to that. And the minister, in a response some time ago, indicated that potentially they were going to send that kind of question of coverage for firefighters volunteer to the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation. I'm wondering if the minister could advise us if one, does he support the idea of presumptive coverage for first responders, and two, what role is he playing to maybe move that the question around those benefits to first responders across the province, and specifically what the minister indicated around the Nova Scotia Health Research Foundation.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I know this is an area of not just deep interest, but the member is again hoping to see our province take on more of the needs, both medical and financial costs that somebody suffering from PTSD does incur. So what we have done as a government is bring 4 departments together. The 4 departments have been meeting. The ministers and designate are attending those meetings, and I know I've been there with, of course, with Labour and Advanced Education, also Justice, Department of Health and Wellness. And we're now formulating a plan. I think it remains very, very timely, very much a requirement to be able to give Nova Scotians, and especially those who who are suffering from PTSD and their families, what we will be doing in the province, both in terms of those who suffer and I think those in preparing first responders, and especially those who are in the volunteer sector. We in Nova Scotia have a huge number of people in the volunteer sector who are first responders. So work continues in this area, and I think we'll have more as the time goes on.
Time has elapsed for the New Democratic Party's 1 hour of questioning. We will move back to the Progressive Conservative Party with 20 minutes remaining. I'd like to recognize the honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the Minister for the answers that he's been given and his staff and the dialogue back and forth. I'd like to take the first 15 minutes, which I can't, and ask him about some of the well-known famous hockey players from his hometown in Newfoundland, the Falconer family. I'm sure that many of your colleagues around the House are not aware that, that one of them played with the famous Gordie Howe. But anyway, that'll be for another day. I have just perhaps 4 or 5 questions, and I'm sure you've tapped into them during your many hours here in the legislature. But the first one is dealing with the mental health and the beds in the Aberdeen, the beds in Truro. And the first question is dealing with a cost, and I guess it's the amount of dollars that actually went to Truro to increase their beds from 10 to 14. My understanding that money came from Pictou County for those 4 extra beds. So I was just looking perhaps at an approximate cost for that move.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I know this is a challenging area, and if I was again on the other side of the House, I'd probably be asking the same question. Because as we go into one provincial health authority, you know, we're having I guess a line item that is there for the entire province. So what has taken place is that we're building a mental health hub in Truro that will have more beds open. And at this point, I'm not sure if it involved more psychiatric and psychology psychologists and psychiatric nurses and additional personnel. Just that the unit has the capacity to add 4 more beds, and that they have done. And this will be the first, of course, budget report from the NSHA, and that's on the verge of being approved. And there may, in fact, be a reference in their budget to how allocation of resources from one area has impacted on another, but it's not a dollar amount that we have here in our provincial budget.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Yeah, I thank the Minister for that particular answer, and looking forward to the some additional information. I noticed earlier in the evening you were talking about the School Plus program, and I assume that you're working with the Department of Education with that. I better talk through to you, Mr. Chair. But you mentioned with the School Plus program and the benefits of the program and so on, and I think it's a great program, a wonderful program, and I'm looking forward and hoping to see every school in Nova Scotia involved in this particular program. I know when I entered North Nova Education Centre back in 2003, they had a health center, and I think it was very, very beneficial to the students having this health center. And every year it seemed to grow, where we were having more resources and that were available to help students with particular issues and so on. I believe that there's personnel going in there at the moment a couple of days a week, and this particular person has a caseload of about 18 students that they deal with. And again, I'm sure we could have someone there every day of the week, and they would be busy. But I believe in the province right now, Mr. Chair, we're touching on maybe 200 schools. I know in New Glasgow we have New Glasgow Academy, A.G. Bailey Elementary, and North Nova Education Centre, which is a 9 to 12 complex. I guess one question surrounding that: do you foresee, Minister, this program being pushed really hard, because it seems to be a very successful program? It seems to be working, and I think it's an inroad to solving some of the problems that we have had with our youth in the communities across the province.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member from Pictou Centre for that question. And you know, without going back and going through the research that was done by Dr. Jana Davidson on how strong the School Plus program is, the member himself is aware of some of those benefits. I think the real benefit of that program is that the person who is doing this work is very, very much involved with the school, involved with the home, and involved with agencies in the community. So it's a chance to do that wraparound service for a child who is having mental health issues of whatever nature they may be. And we're providing the funding for the mental health component of Schools Plus, and it's delivered, of course, through the school and community. So this is one that in each of the past 3 years we have put additional money in the budget for, and again, the member is correct. We want to see this grow across the school, have those family of schools that eventually are all embraced, and I think there are great dividends to this. It's interesting that some of the new wait times are actually paralleling for our adolescents and youth. Their drop is paralleling adding more and more School Plus personnel into our communities. So I think there's a real strong relationship there, that a child is getting help very early, not leading them to either their family doctor or a guidance counselor recommending professional help beyond the school. So I see this program as one that the goal is eventually to cover our 420 schools in the province.
The Honourable Member for Pictou Centre.
Having the opportunity to talk to many teachers, administrators, guidance counselors in our schools, Mr. Chair, there's certainly an opportunity for further professional development. And one of my questions to the Minister would be, will there be any extra funding in the very near future to train teachers that don't have the training, to train guidance counselors that often don't have that training in mental health issues, and perhaps a third question would be, have they looked or will they be looking at our Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Education program, the 2-year program in our province with regard to having our teachers that are coming out in the future years having some background, having some training to be able to go into the profession and be ready to deal with students with mental health issues.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank the member for that question. It's got a couple of different parts to it. First of all, there's been a considerable amount of training, and I know Dr. Stan Kuchar has been involved with teachers to help with the very, from the very early years all the way through the school system. In fact, it's now quite a number of years ago that, having spent my career in junior and senior high, and when I was approached by an elementary principal to convey that they wanted to have Dr. Kuchar come and be a resource for their staff to help with a growing number of issues that children were presenting to teachers. And so this, I know, in a number of our school boards triggered a lot of professional development around training the teacher to be the front line, the first person to provide some intervention. So I know a significant number of teachers have been trained. I'm not sure if this position is right across the province, but the Annapolis Valley School Board now have a person who is dealing with the mental health issues of staff, of students, and directing training and appropriate supports for the whole district. So it is getting so much more attention than just even 10 years ago. The member raises a wonderful area. If we think back to our days of the Bachelor of Education, the curriculum was pretty much defined for what we would take, and a lot of it would focus around the philosophy of education, comparative education, psychology of education, the methods, teaching methods, all of these, especially in relation to your subject area. But looking at the total picture of the child and their developmental needs, some of that was there just in relation to education, not so much in terms of the growth and development of the child around what they were experiencing in their family, how they were adjusting to adolescent issues. That was probably not as big a part of the training as it could have been. And it's a great question that I should ask my colleague, the Minister of Education, as to what is happening in our universities in terms of teacher training to look at the determinants of health. Because, again, what happens in the school, those 195 days, and the kind of care that teachers provide, we know is very instrumental in terms of their growth, their development, their adjustments to different age groupings, and how well teachers are trained is a great point that is being made.
The Honourable Member for Pictou-Cedar.
Yeah, just continuing on in that vein, Mr. Chair, with the growth and development of our students, I think that as I mentioned earlier, the dollars are well spent. We're getting a bang for our buck, and I think we have sometimes we spend money, we don't see positive results, but there's very positive results when we spend money in this particular area where we are looking after the growth and development of students, we're training teachers and so on. So I hope that sometime soon, that if it's not already happening, that it'll be part of our BED program in the universities, that teachers will come out with some confidence of identifying and maybe an early diagnosis where they can pass it on to the professionals and have that taken care of. I guess another question I would like to just quickly go over is one that has been handled many times in question period and in debates and so on. And I guess it surrounds the Aberdeen Hospital with the 2 beds that are available for potential patients that arrive there suffering from mental health issues and so on. And I guess I'll word the question around this here. It appears that that what has been created and that's there now, 2 beds, I'll call them temporary beds before that are there in case they have to be moved on to another facility. That particular model looks like it's going to be a permanent one. So maybe I'll do what I'll do is get the minister just to comment on that. So what we have is at the present probably will be the model going forward at the Aberdeen Hospital.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And we all know, how significantly the model of medical care is changing. How few days now a person is spending in hospital after a surgery, a major procedure, and the model for mental health care is also changing. And what will happen at the Aberdeen is what I think we will see in our, certainly in our regional hospitals, and perhaps wherever we have a full-fledged emergency room, is that when a patient comes in and presenting some mental health illness, some trauma. We see this even with people who are well known and speak about their mental health illness. Periodically they may go off their medication, and there's a relapse. So having that person come in, whether it be the Aberdeen or one of our other regional facilities, that to have an observation bed to make sure that there's an early assessment and that that patient is then getting the appropriate treatment. And I believe that's the most significant part of where the change is going about, is getting them in front of the right provider at the right time. And this is what our care response has to work to be more and more. Just placing a person in a bed, without the right treatment, is definitely not the way of the future. Having people assessed, spend a very, very short time in a unit, moved on to either further treatment or back home with follow-up counseling. That's where we need to arrive. That's the work that's now in progress. And my belief is that the Aberdeen will actually become a model. The construction is underway. Those 2 beds will be identified, determined, and how the psychiatric team to assess relates at whatever hour of the day that could very well be one of those models that then we'll see develop across the province in the most appropriate places.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One quick question to the Minister. I believe this is dealing with dialysis. I believe there's 4 beds in Pictou, 8 in Truro. Question to the Minister is, does he foresee that particular type of unit being in the Aberdeen in the near future?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think it's just a matter of seconds remaining, I do believe. What I can tell the member is that, for now...
Order, please. Time has elapsed. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee do now rise and report progress to the House.
The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House.
Order, please. Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on Supply will now report.
That the Committee of the Whole on Supply has met and made very considerable progress and begs leave to sit again.
Is it agreed? It is agreed. We'll now move back to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call private and local bills for second reading?
Will now call private and local bills for second reading.
Would you please call Bill number 176, the Otter Landfill Act?
Will now call Bill number 176, the Otter Lake Landfill Act. The Honourable Member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill 176 be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, I could speak for several minutes on the topic of the Otter Lake landfill, but I'm just going to say a few words. I know it's getting late, but obviously this bill supersedes the politics that we see sometimes in the House and all levels of government. This is about commitments made to the communities that I serve, the affected host communities surrounding the Otter Lake landfill. So this has been in place since 1998, and at the time with a community-led strategy which was developed in 1994 by HRM Regional Solid Waste Management Project to develop the strategy. There was community stakeholders committee that was developed to look at ways that they could find a host community to build the landfill and have some confidence in the people that were around the community. And what was developed with the community members of HRM were a number of safeguards, environmental safeguards, defined footprint, which was 9 cells, and the level of 112 meters above the sea level, which was measured by a balloon test, which was roughly where the tree line was, so it wouldn't be visible, and it would be set in place to minimize things like odor complaints or litter that might blow off the cells, and a state-of-the-art front-end processing and a state-of-the-art waste stabilization facility that was put in place that was not a cheap development, so it definitely had its cost, but the end result was higher environmental protections, indeed one of the highest environmental protections in the world when it was built. So we had people from all over the world come and tour the landfill to see what we were doing in Halifax, and it really put Nova Scotia on the map in terms of solid waste, how we were handling solid waste. Since then, there was development before I became an MLA, and through an exercise, a study to look at cost savings, there was a number of the components reviewed. They were costly, so things like the WSF and FEP were looked at, the cell height extension was looked at, and obviously the length of time that the landfill could be there. If that was extended, that would be a huge cost savings for HRM, because most people know it's over $100 million to site a landfill, and roughly $20 million to build a new cell. So this is a lot of money that we're talking about, and a lot of weigh-in from community when you source some of these. And actually, Timberley wasn't even on the map, wasn't even one of the considerations when the landfill was sited there. The only reason why the people of Timberley Prospect accepted the landfill was based on the community-led strategy and based on the understanding that the landfill would be there for approximately 25 years, or the amount of time that it would take for waste to go into the number of cells that were defined, which was 9, and the height that I then mentioned. So this bill is about restoring some trust in government, and there's a term used a lot by the community that is verifiable trust. So after I've been watching over the last few years, there's been a lot of statements saying there will be no changes to the footprint. In fact, all political parties in the House, I have to say, have supported that, and I thank them for that. I thank the current Minister of Environment and the former Minister of Environment under our government, but as well, I have to thank the member from Queens, Shelburne, who was the former former Minister of Environment, for also standing up and saying that we will not go back on the community commitments made by HRM and the province, for that matter. So why do I bring this forward? We're at a point now where there's less volume going in, there's more source separation. The cells that we're going to develop now, cells 7, 8, and 9, are indeed larger. So the timing that it's going to take to fill these cells will go beyond the 25 years. We understand that. The community understands that. There's nothing contractual to actually close the landfill down 25 years, nor is it in the public interest to prematurely close the landfill when there's capacity left, and given the significant funding it costs to build new cells and to site a new landfill. But what I think is fair in the balance of considerations is the certainty for people to know that when the landfill becomes full, that it is full, and that would be a full stop. It's important to mention here, when we're talking about proposed vertical expansion, that when there was public consultation 2 years ago, 80% of the people that went to public consultation all over HRM, not just the affected community, but 80% of the respondents were opposed to vertical expansion. So again, I'm ingraining in legislation the inability for a permanent cell extension on any of the cells that will be built in Otter Lake. And I want to say I commend the Community Monitoring Committee, who has worked very hard to be the watchdog of this operation, and they are actually ingrained in the industrial permit. So any of the various operational components that are at Otter Lake, they have their eyes on, and they are the body that communicates directly with the community. And I expect any of the various components that are in place to remain in place unless they're proven not to have adverse impacts to the environment, to the surrounding communities. I want to commend HRM Council for developing a community integration fund because of the extra years that will be added on beyond the 25 years that I mentioned, which many expected to be the case. And I want to commend local community organizations such as Woodens River organization, who monitors the Bluff Trail. They wrote to HRM and I believe the province as well to ensure that their position of not allowing vertical extension was on record. Obviously, many of the members would know of the Bluff Trail. It's a spot that's in Timberley that has elevation, and they don't want to have the visual lines impacted. So there are considerations above and beyond just the technical aspect from the environment standpoint, but also the visual aspect. But above all, it's the moral contract that's been stated by Halifax Regional Municipality and by the province back in the early 90s when they couldn't find any place to take the landfill. So I believe with this legislation we will attain the verifiable trust that the community is seeking. I ask for the support of all the members in the House, and I look forward to bringing this to committee in case the public wants to weigh in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise to speak to Bill 176, an act to maintain the current footprint and certain requirements of the Otter Lake landfill. I don't have a lot to say. I want to congratulate the member from Timberley Prospect for introducing, I believe, his first bill. It's definitely one that we support. And I will just mention that I believe it was the PC caucus that actually first spoke on this back in April 2013. My colleague from Inverness had posed some questions with regards to it, and then followed up by a resolution from my colleague from Barrington Argyll. And it's basically, at the end of the day, just the right thing to do. Anything that we can do to ensure that the residents of this constituency are receiving what they were promised in the past is something that we absolutely support, and we look forward to law amendments. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to rise to speak on Bill 174. I think it's important to recognize that the 176, my eyesight, maybe I need to get them checked. 176, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to recognize, I don't wear glasses, but I might need to, recognize that the provincial government does have a role to play in ensuring that landfills that are technically overseen by the municipality do the right thing and ensure that when the public's informed of their creation, of their operation, of the limits and what is kind of portrayed on what's going to happen, especially when a community has one of these sites in their community. The province does have a role to play, and I'm glad to see this piece of legislation come forward. We do support it, because I think it's important that we listen to the public. And the province does, as I said, have a role ultimately on the approvals of these sites. I would hope maybe we can look at ensuring that not only do we recognize the work that's been done by the member from Timberley Prospect and others in the House to bring this issue forward. There's a number of issues that have come up over the last number of years, and one that's concerning to many in my community, the community I represent, and the surrounding areas is one of leachate, and that is produced from Otter Lake. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, the city's Environmental and Sustainability Standing Committee recommended actually trucking the leachate from the Otter Lake landfill back to the Sackville landfill. This is a landfill that's been closed for a number of years, Mr. Speaker, and the public and the community were told that when this was closed, it was something that the community hosted that landfill for well over 18 years, that it would be closed permanently. And I attended the meeting, the public meeting that was held when this recommendation was put before council in the community of Upper Sackville, and there was well over 200 members of that community there who couldn't believe they were having to stand up and come out to a meeting and talk against the possibility of the landfill in Sackville really reopening in their eyes. They said it loud and clear that closed means closed, and that's what the public and the community was promised. So I'm a bit concerned with the municipality and their ability to change the commitment that they made to the public. We see in this piece of legislation that it's going to be a stronger commitment to the community. I would hope maybe that we could possibly see the same issue with the leachate dealt in the same way. We know that the issue isn't going to go away. We always need to address landfills and the runoffs that come from it. But as I said, in our community, we hosted that landfill for so many years, and I would not want to see the municipality change their commitment to the community, and I wouldn't want to see the province approve that. At the public meeting, of course, a lot of the anger, a lot of the concern was directed towards the municipality, the council, but I asked one question in that community meeting, and it was, does the province have to approve this change? And the answer was yes. And I know I questioned the minister at the time, and he said it's too early. There's no request yet to the province to approve this. You know, you don't need to worry about it. Well, if that's the case, then why are we seeing this piece of legislation? Because I know the member from Timberley Prospect is concerned that potentially those changes could happen. And I would hope that if the government's willing to pass this piece of legislation, that the government will stand up and support the community of Sackville and say no to any kind of reopening of that facility, especially the leachate and the leachate that may be trucked into that. So we do support this piece of legislation, but I want to make sure that the government recognizes that if they're going to go this far and support this initiative around Otter Lake, that they need to stand up and make sure that the municipality knows that the commitment made to the community of Sackville needs to be upheld, and that we do not want to see leachate be trucked into that closed site. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this bill.
Found to recognize the honourable member for Timberley Prospect. It will be to close second reading on Bill number 126, the Otter Lake Landfill Act. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Mr. Speaker, before I do that, could I make an introduction?
Permission granted.
Okay, I just want to draw the members' attention to the West Gallery where we have with us, I just noticed a member from the Community Monitoring Committee, which I've mentioned before. He's the Vice Chair, Scott Guthrie, if you want to stand up and receive the warm welcome of the House. And Mr. Speaker, thank you through you to my colleagues for their comments. Certainly appreciate the support, and I definitely am sensitive to some of the concerns raised about the leachate and some of that stuff. Obviously, it's a challenging, complex topic with solid waste, and I guess just to reiterate, the impetus is with this particular legislation is because the Department of Environment a lot of times has to look at the nature of the technical aspects of an application, and obviously there are some we have to be careful where solid waste actually lands in each level of government. I always try to be very sensitive to different levels of government and not interfering in what is truly in their auspices. But as the member for Sackville-Cobequid says, it is the Nova Scotia government's role to approve applications, and therefore they should be sensitive to commitments made to communities. And on that, I move that we close debate on second reading.
Motion is to close second reading on Bill number 176, the Otter Lake Landfill Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 176, an act to maintain the current footprint and current requirements of the Otter Lake landfill.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
Will now call public bills for second reading.
Would you please call Bill number 174, the Financial Measures 2016 Act?
Will now call Bill number 174, the Financial Measures Act 2016. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction before I begin.
Permission granted.
All right, I'd like to direct members' attention to the East Gallery, where we have Caroline Dobson with us. Caroline is actually the mother of our page Sarah here in the legislature, and we often recognize the family members and the support that each of us as members in the legislature receive, but I think also certainly the parents of our pages that support us here also deserve recognition of the House as well for allowing and encouraging these young individuals to become involved and engaged with the legislative process. So if we give her a warm welcome of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill 174 be now read a second time. So, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2016-17 does demonstrate what is possible when we stick to a plan and we work together to implement that plan. It shows that we can build a stronger Nova Scotia when we're working together, Mr. Speaker. The Financial Measures Act is a piece of legislation that is designed to implement certain legislative requirements that are needed to enact or to implement decisions made within the budget that was introduced on April 19th, Mr. Speaker. So within the budget, we know that we've invested in opportunities for growth in our education, for youth and jobs training. We invest in healthy people, our healthy economy. And of course, Mr. Speaker, we always remember that we have to invest in the people of Nova Scotia who need our support the most. We've been making difficult and strategic decisions over the past 2.5 years, but we've been following our fiscal plan and putting together our path to fiscal sustainability, Mr. Speaker, and we are going to continue to work to that end. Now, Mr. Speaker, specifically in the Financial Measures Act this year, we have a couple of items to highlight. The first item, Mr. Speaker, is there are provisions in the legislation with respect to the capital investment tax credit. We know that the private sector creates jobs and grows our economy, Mr. Speaker. The Nova Scotia government needs to work with our private sector to provide those opportunities for Nova Scotians to get the employment they need and to grow our economy. The capital investment tax credit provides an incentive for investment in large capital projects in the province of Nova Scotia. The large businesses we have are key engines to economic growth and our exports, Mr. Speaker. The capital investment tax credit was first announced in October 2014 by the then Minister of Economic Rural Development and Tourism at that time, the current Minister of Energy and Trade. Mr. Speaker, the tax credit that was introduced through legislative changes does go into effect. It began January 1st, 2015. But regulations will be forthcoming to finalize the implementation of the capital tax credit. But we did need to make a couple of legislative changes in here. One in particular is to ensure that we have financial safeguard in place. Provides the authority, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister of Finance to implement a cap on the tax credit to ensure that we respect the province's ability to pay when this credit goes into play and companies begin applying for it. So, Mr. Speaker, this particular program is designed for large capital investments in the province of Nova Scotia. It's a minimum investment of $15 million and a tax credit of 15% of that capital project. Mr. Speaker, an item that was announced specifically in the budget, 2016 budget, but which required changes to the Income Tax Act was the food bank tax credit for farmers, Mr. Speaker. That credit is implemented in this legislation in its entirety. This is a new tax credit being introduced for the first time. This builds upon, and this tax credit builds upon our commitment to deliver support to those Nova Scotians who need our support the most. We recognize that the food banks in the province of Nova Scotia provide important service to the people of Nova Scotia in need. This food bank tax credit for farmers will help our food banks get much-needed agricultural products, healthy food for the people in Nova Scotia. For this tax credit, farmers will get a 25% tax credit on the fair market value of the donation. Generally speaking, these types of food bank tax credits, Mr. Speaker, are relatively new in the few jurisdictions in Canada that currently have them. We are going to focus initially on fresh produce this year, but we continue to work with Feed Nova Scotia and the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture in order to work out again, the final details of the regulations for the implementation of this. What this legislation does is provides the legislative framework for this tax credit to move forward. We again look forward to continued collaboration and work with Feed Nova Scotia and Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture to ensure that the tax credit meets the needs of the people of Nova Scotia, but also the farmers who are taking the time to make the donations, the contribution to this very worthy cause. Mr. Speaker, there's an additional change in the piece introduced in the FMA, which is amending the Provincial Court Act. The amendments in the Provincial Court Act, Mr. Speaker, is tweaking the process by which judicial compensation, that is compensation for the judges in the province of Nova Scotia, is managed. We recognize that the independence of the judiciary is very important, Mr. Speaker. They, as you know, represent the third branch of government in our democracy, Mr. Speaker, and the separation of duties we do respect as important. We respect the hard work of the judges in the province of Nova Scotia that they do on behalf of all Nova Scotians. We respect the integrity by which they conduct themselves on the bench, Mr. Speaker, and we respect the independence by which they fulfill their duties. But, Mr. Speaker, just as the judges of the province of Nova Scotia are responsible for making and managing the judicial side of governing and the province, the executive branch, the legislative branch of government are responsible for the finances of the province, Mr. Speaker. The change that is being implemented here just provides a safeguard in the compensation process. Currently, the process, Mr. Speaker, would see that it does have a tribunal set up to review, evaluate, and make a recommendation for the compensation provided to judges in the province of Nova Scotia. The recommendation in its current form is binding on the government, which means the government, which is responsible for public finances, does not have a decision or an option or a decision to make when the decision is binding by that tribunal. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is one of only two jurisdictions, Northwest Territories being the other, that has a fully binding position of the tribunal. So our change here, Mr. Speaker, is just to remove the binding criteria. The recommendation, the tribunal's structure, format, and directions will all be the same and as it has been, as it is in other jurisdictions, and they will be making the recommendation, but respecting the obligation, the responsibility of the government for the public finances, Mr. Speaker, provides the option for the Executive Council to accept, modify, or reject the recommendation from the tribunal. But, Mr. Speaker, in the event that the recommendation of the tribunal is not fully endorsed by Executive Council, there is a requirement to report back the reasons why the decision that differs from the tribunal is made. There are a couple of other items, Mr. Speaker, identified. The three that I've mentioned so far, probably three of the largest. There are a couple of other items, Mr. Speaker, that would be include a budget measure which authorizes and manages the increase to the tobacco taxes, the 2 cents per cigarette that was announced in the budget. This legislation puts that into effect, Mr. Speaker. We also have some housekeeping items around the Shared Services Act and regulations. We have the dates by which the legislation goes into effect. We've made some governance change, Mr. Speaker, to the superannuation, the public service superannuation plan. It's a positive governance change, Mr. Speaker. Currently, the government has representatives on that plan. But they are obliged, Mr. Speaker, to vote as a block. That is, all government appointees to appointed trustees currently have to vote as a single unit. They have to come to consensus and vote as one voice on behalf of the government. I believe it's appropriate governance, Mr. Speaker, to allow those representatives who have a fiduciary responsibility to the plan that they are responsible for as trustees to exercise that authority as individuals, and so we are allowing them one member, one vote. A couple of other important governance changes, Mr. Speaker. We're providing a provision around tax credits when a tax certificate is being issued, Mr. Speaker. Currently, if an application is written in such a way that it meets the criteria, the minister essentially is required to issue the tax certificate for the tax credit. And this would go generally for any tax credits requiring a tax certificate. Mr. Speaker, for proper governance, it would be appropriate because existing legislation provides provisions recognizing that an application or submission that comes forward may become aware that information may be misleading or inaccurate. And so the Minister of Finance currently has the authority to revoke a tax certificate that was issued. Mr. Speaker, the gap that we identified was the fact that in the event the Minister of Finance believed that there was misleading, inaccurate, or fraudulent information, they would have not have the authority to not issue the tax certificate in the first place. So that's, again, just a housekeeping item to improve governance of tax credit administration. And finally, Mr. Speaker, there is a change that brings testamentary trusts, that is, trust provisions that are created through estate planning at the time of death, in line with the federal changes, Mr. Speaker, that will see that change again is being made to align ourselves with our federal partners. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I do look forward to comments from my colleagues through the second reading. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleasure to rise this evening and speak to this bill. And there's a number of things through this whole process that obviously warrant some discussion. Anytime we think about the budget of the province, we should think of all the moving parts and the impact that the budget has on the people of the province. And I think I mentioned on Budget Day, one of the first things that jumped out was around the ferry and the convention centre. We'll come to that, but something that immediately sprung out was roads, and what are we doing with roads, and the whole aspect of roads, especially for the rural MLAs in this chamber. They know how important getting some road work is to the people that live in the constituencies, and I've found it amazing over the last number of months how restricted the Department of Transportation is in its ability to do small projects. And I have a number of situations around culverts at the edge of people's properties where, you know, it would certainly appear to any normal person that the problems with the culverts and such would be the responsibility of transportation. I'm thinking of a couple cases where the shoulder of the road is just eroding, it's falling away, it's coming out from under the road, it's impacting a person's driveway, and then the Department of Transportation comes and says, no, I'm sorry, that's the landowner's responsibility. And they'll point to something in some manual somewhere they'll use to make that case. But you just know that the people that are there representing the department, they're not comfortable with having to do that because it's not right. It's not right to the residents. And but why is this happening? Why is this happening? It's happening because there's no money in the transportation budget for maintenance. There's no money in the transportation budget for taking care of the things that the department should be taking care of. So when we look at this year's budget through that lens, and when we think about the Department of Transportation budget, we have to be concerned about the priorities of the government and how they will spend that budget. And we obviously have to talk about the Yarmouth ferry situation. That any way you look at it, no matter which side you're on, you have to acknowledge that that's a decision that the government has made, that's a priority to them, and that is where they will be investing significant amounts of money. Significant amounts of money. And over the fullness of time, the amount of money that's being invested in that is so significant that the government won't even take a stab at calculating how much it might be, instead content to ridicule anyone who does try to make an informed forecast of what that cost might be. So any time you have a government that says, no, don't ask how much that might cost, it's not fair for you to ask that, it becomes laughable. So over the course of the arrangement, it will be in its totality 100 million. Personally, I think it would be much more than that. I think my leader was conservative in his estimate on that. But we know from the beginning that the government is not comfortable.
Please. The honourable member for Pictou East has the floor.
That the government is not comfortable with the amounts, and we see that immediately with the only number that's been disclosed is the minimum amount that it will cost taxpayers over 2 years. And that amount that's been disclosed.
Order, please. The honourable member for Pictou East has the floor.
And the amount that's been disclosed as the minimum for 2 years is 33 million. So when we look at the budget that's before us, and we try to reconcile the statements by the government of 33 million to the numbers that they have presented, and it was a bit of a process. And with a bit of scratching and digging, we determined that part of that, $13 million, was actually put back in last year's budget, because remarkably, the contract was signed March 24th, and funds were distributed before March 31st, which allowed them the flexibility to plunk a significant amount of money, $13 million, into last year's budget. And I think $13 million, but we had to scratch and claw to find that, Mr. Speaker. But there's lots of amounts in this budget that there's no scratching and clawing to find. You can find in the glossy pamphlet that they pass out with the budget. The very first line talks about a $6 million move for high-speed internet, which is a good thing. But I say that in a context of $6 million frontline billing, line 1, but $13 million hidden away in last year's numbers, not disclosed anywhere. So just think about the message that sends, and clearly it would certainly seem like the $13 million wasn't frontline billing, and I'm sure they thought that maybe this was something that people wouldn't pick up on. But we did pick up on it. And I think when the deal is like the gift that keeps on giving, when every day something else we learn about this deal, whether it's blackout dates, whether it's paying for terminal upgrades in the state of Maine. You know, we haven't even got around to talking about the winter work for the vessel, because the taxpayers of this province will pay the complete cash deficiency for the year. And that cash deficiency, I would submit to you, gets larger every time they black out a day, that there'll be nobody riding on that ferry. The cash deficiency just got a little higher. And by the way, the City of Portland has the ability to institute more blackout days. They just have to give 30 days notice and they can put some more blackout days. So how much will the cash deficiency be? Well, this government has estimated that over 2 years it's going to be $33 million. That's if they get 60,000 riders on the ferry per year. And I'm going to do a little, I'll do a little pool. We'll do a little, we will take a pool.
Ask her how important the ferry is. It's not the same company. It is. No, it's not.
Order, please. The honourable member for Pictou East has the floor.
And I think I think people around the province will could have a bit of fun with a little pool on estimating how many riders that ferry service might see. Because guess what? If it's not 60,000, then the cost to the taxpayers just went up significantly. And that might be, you know, I know the Chase the Ace game has some popularity. Maybe there'll be could be a little game around guess the number of riders on the ferry. So this gives you a glimpse into the priorities of the government. That's what they've decided to do. So when I talk to people in my area and the people around the province, and they want to know, well, what about the roads? Then they'll be informed that, well, there's a decision made on where that budget went. And our RIM budget, we know, $16 million this year, is down 25% from what it was just 3 or 4 years ago, I think my colleague would say. And the status of the roads certainly hasn't gotten that much better, that they require less spending. So, you know, roads are a very significant issue for sure, and who knows what will happen. And the minister has mentioned during budget estimates that he's looking for some ways to try and get some more money to roads, and I hope he has some success in that, because we deserve it. It's not in the budget, it's not in the capital budget, it's not in this budget. So it won't be this year, folks, but maybe going forward, that'll become a priority of theirs. It's not a priority of this government today, but maybe at some point it will. But that's just on the transportation budget, and the transportation budget will go towards things like the Yarmouth Ferry. It will go towards things like the Blue Nose, and all bridges and everything else. There's so many uses for that money. So we'll see if any of it gets to the rural roads that helps the people that travel those roads every day. So it's a concern for sure for me, and I can hear some of the members opposite making light of it, and that's their prerogative. But I can tell you the people who travel the roads don't think it's that funny, and we'll see how that works out. But that's transportation, and obviously when we look at the health budget, we have there's a lot of concerns around the status of health care in this province, and we can go through some of them, but we have the government's efforts to hold the health care budget to, I think, a 0.9% increase are very admirable. But I have to ask, this government often does things that are admirable, but their execution has proven to be very poor on a number of issues. And around the health care, the execution risk is very scary. Very scary, because if the objective to hold the health care budget will be met by a reduction in services, that's not a good thing. It no longer becomes admirable. And I can only speak to, my area where I do see a reduction in services. We will talk about some of the mental health support services that are disappearing from rural areas that just aren't there to help those people that need it. And we've all heard the terribly tragic stories about people self-identifying, realizing that they have an issue, looking for help, and not being able to get it. And in Pictou County, with the closure of our mental health unit, those problems have only been exacerbated. And we hear stories about looking for help and reporting to emergency. And one of the protocols would be now, if you feel like you are in danger of hurting yourself, or if you feel like you are a threat to hurting other people, you should present at the emergency room. And Mr. Speaker, I could give you a long list of names of people who did just that and who were turned away from the emergency room saying, you don't need help, or we can't help you here, and sent home. And that is that's certainly not something to make light of. That's a very serious issue. It's a very serious shortcoming of our mental health care system at this point. And to try and save money by on that, well, to quote my son, that's not cool. That's not cool at all, Mr. Speaker. So around the mental health budget is the same this year as it was last year. And the problems, the issues, the gaps in service are worse, much worse. So people will have to judge for themselves. Is that okay? Is that admirable? I don't think it is, Mr. Speaker. I have serious issues with that. In rural Nova Scotia, not just in rural Nova Scotia, I hear from lots of people in HRM that are concerned about the doctor shortage. And the Minister of Finance was talking about the situation with the judges. And I'm going to come back to that, but first I'd like the opportunity to give a little perspective around that. So on this side of the House, when we talk about the doctor shortage, we will often hear from back across the floor that there's more doctors per capita in Nova Scotia than anywhere else. And that seems to be justification from this government to say there's not a problem, there's nothing to see here, we don't know what you're talking about. And it's a false statistic in the sense that it may very well be true mathematically, but it's not a real representation of what's happening in the province. Because when you get into the rural areas, obviously in the doctors per capita statistic, you are going to include a lot of specialists. You are going to include a lot of doctors that are maybe doing research. You are going to include doctors that are maybe geographically condensed in HRM or something. So while the statistic may be mathematically accurate, it's not morally accurate, is the way I would say that. And thank you to my colleague for my choice with words there. But there is a doctor shortage. It's very real. And it is something that you can't hide from people. People will, if everything's going okay in their life, and maybe they have a job and things are going well, they might pick up the paper and they might read that the economy's great and everything's just hunky-dory, and that may make sense to them from their world. But you can't fool somebody. You can't trick somebody who's looking for a doctor into believing that the healthcare system is functioning properly. You just can't make them believe that there's not a doctor shortage when they can't get a doctor. And I've had so many calls over the last few weeks, and just before I came in here yesterday and again tonight, I was talking to a 90-year-old lady who had fallen and broken her leg just before Christmas, and she's on some different medications and in rehab and stuff. She does not have a doctor, and she's been trying to find one. She's been trying to work with the new health authority, and the first thing that the health authority said to her was, do your children have a family doctor, her grown children? And yes, they do. So the health authority said, there's your answer. Get that doctor to accept you as a patient. Well, the problem is that doctor can't accept any new patients. That doctor is actually getting 30 calls a day from people who are looking for a doctor. So he just couldn't possibly accept any more patients. And imagine how he feels about that. He doesn't feel too good about that, Mr. Speaker. So the lady went back to the health authority and said, look, that's not going to work. What shall I do? Well, the next suggestion from the health authority was that she call her MLA. Because that's the status of healthcare in this province, is that MLAs are going to solve the doctor shortage on their own, because the health authority is putting their hands up in the air saying, we don't know what to do. We can't find a doctor for you. Go call somebody else. And then they'll stand in this house and say there's more doctors per capita. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. And in this budget, the health care budget is going to stay flat, because we're going to save money by not having doctors. That's not cool. That's not cool. So let's look at where we are. Why might that be the case? And there will certainly be good people working on recruitment of doctors. And there will be good people working on retainment of doctors here. But they are working against the backdrop of a government that goes to war with doctors. Doctors haven't had a contract in over a year. There's just before Christmas, I think it was before Christmas when the Premier came out in the news and disparaged doctors as greedy people who were looking for a 55% increase. And at the time, doctors called me and said, why would the Premier do that? Even if they were in negotiations, why would he do that? And it's called politics. It's called politics, because there's only so many doctors in the province, and there's many more people, and it might be acceptable to the general population to just, look down at doctors until they need one, of course. Doctors are greedy, and good on the Premier for being tough with them and stuff. But the issue is that when you create that environment of animosity, it makes it hard for doctors to commit to working here. And we saw in the paper doctors clearly saying, I can't in good conscience recommend to my colleagues that they should come to this province and work. We saw that right in the paper. Doctors would say that. So here we have people working hard to recruit and retain, and we have this happening. It just makes it hard. And now there's lots of talk that the government, doctors obviously are not in a union, but when they have a contract dispute, they go to arbitration. Binding arbitration is what they have, and they have talk from this government that they'll take away binding arbitration. And it was just talk until we just saw what happened with the judges. I would say doctors are probably next. So doctors are scared to commit to working in this province. That's the environment that's been created by this government. And as a result, 90-year-old people can't find doctors. And the health authority is putting their hands up in the air saying, call your MLA. Maybe if you put enough pressure on the government, they'll actually try and move on the problem. That's where we're at with healthcare in this province. And I think the history lesson would show that there were similar issues back in the 80s under Liberal government. We had severe doctor shortages. Severe doctor shortages that we were starting to come back from. If you're going to have an efficient, functioning healthcare system, you need doctors. Doctors are not meant to be low-hanging fruit that you can alienate and pick on and then assume that they're going to come and work in the province. It's just not going to, it's not productive. So we'll see what happens there, but I certainly hope that we can find some good news on doctors. I don't know that the Department of Health, they were allegedly taken by surprise by a few doctors that retired. The Premier said, how could we know? The doctors are 70 years old and they're practicing long hours because they're trying to serve the patients, and yet the government is surprised when they retire. So I hope that the department is looking at the demographics of the doctors that we do have here and maybe preparing themselves so that we Nova Scotians don't have to suffer from the lack of planning and the lack of understanding of this Liberal government on a number of issues. So in terms of mental health, there is so much that this government could be doing, should be doing, and we don't see that in the budget, and people are suffering, and we need to get to a place where people that have mental health issues can get the help they need and be productive members of society, functioning at their full capability, paying more tax, and just contributing to their communities. And it's obvious the benefits that would have, but I worry that we have a government that looks too much at that as an expense item. It says this is the cost of that, and we can't afford that cost. So that's maybe how they look at it in their boardroom. We can't afford that cost, but they are naive enough to believe that if they don't pay that cost, there won't be any repercussions. And there are repercussions to many of these decisions. So we have issues with a number of things on the expense side. The convention center discussion is not done for sure, by a long way, in just the ways, again, the presentation of that money and the spin around what really happened there, and people see through that. People see through that for sure. A number of people reached out to me and said, "Yeah, that's silly," quite frankly. So that's a concern when you see those types of presentations in financial statements. They make you wonder about a lot of things. When you see those types of things between the ferry, issue with the 13 million and the convention center stuff, and then you look at the revenue projections, and you think to yourself, well, how are those going to materialize? And it won't take much of a miss on the revenue projections to this budget, and I forget how the minister described it, but I think he said something about his plan is working, but it won't take much for the plan to be obviously derailed, and also it'll take if the actual numbers start to come in, we'll see how it looks. But not to it's at the end of the day, it's a $10 billion spend, and there'll be good things in there. There'll be good expenditures in there, and there'll be other stuff that we could debate all day and night, and many times we have. But we were obviously pleased to see the food bank stuff come to fruition. That's it's a tip of the hat to my colleague from Inverness on that, who's been bringing that to this floor since 2011, I believe. And I remember chatting with him one time about why he did that at that time, and he gave full credit to a gentleman called Larry Evans.
Chair of the food bank in Port Hawkesbury.
Yeah, Larry Evans was going to say was the chair of the food bank in Port Hawkesbury, and he had that. He's been championing that for 5 years or more, and my colleague brought it to the floor of the legislature. And as oftentimes happens in politics, it actually winds its way through under a repackaged and rebranded thing. But the good thing is it's done. That's the good thing, and that's what's important here, and it's done now, and it's in here. But I don't have too much more to add at this stage, Mr. Speaker, other than to say that there are things in this budget that are interesting, there are things in this budget that are pleasing, and there are things in this budget that are certainly concerning. I will say that I sincerely hope that at the end of the year, when the actuals are said and done, and the projections have become reality, I hope that this province is in a surplus. That will be a wonderful thing. It will be a wonderful thing if it's not at the expense of Nova Scotians through the healthcare system, and it will be a wonderful thing if it's not at the expense of jobs and a growing economy. But there's a lot of risk in here around the ferry. There's a lot of risk in here around the ferries. We'll see what happens there. There's a lot of risk in here around the delivery of services. And I wish the government well in fulfilling the promises that they're making in this document. They've bitten off a lot here to chew, and we'll see how they do in the execution. But those few words, I'll take my seat.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. That
Order,
quote
please.
has been attributed.
I'd like to remind the honourable member for Dartmouth South that it is unparliamentary to infer that any member of this House is attempting to deceive anybody. The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Oh, well. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, what we have here is a tale. When we look at the Financial Measures Act and the incorporation or the presentation of this budget, I think it is important to recognize that this government is attempting to weave its own narrative. And in so doing, it has been presenting Nova Scotians with financial figures that fit that narrative. The government has an austerity agenda, and it has had that from day one. To further this agenda, it has been telling Nova Scotians that the province is
Order,
in poor
please.
financial...
The honourable member for Dartmouth South has the floor.
The government has been telling Nova Scotians that the province is in poor financial shape. Pushing this agenda, the government has trampled labour rights, cut funding to many community groups and organizations, dismantled the film and television industry, and neglected to make much-needed investment in public infrastructure. Just a few months ago...
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth South has the floor.
Just a few short months ago, in December, the finance minister continued this doom and gloom narrative. Revenue was tanking, expenses were over budget. For a government seeking a wage freeze for public sectors, these financial estimates suited things just fine. Now we are being told that this is a balanced budget. Really, I have a feeling I am not the only Nova Scotian who has trouble believing this government when it comes to financial projections. Mr. Speaker, final estimates for last year demonstrate that the government's narrative takes priority over the needs of Nova Scotians. For example, let's look at housing. Last year, the housing strategy was underspent by $1.1 million. 2 years ago, it was underspent by $2.4 million. Last year, housing subsidies were underspent by $3.5 million, and the renovation budget was underspent by $1.5 million. If underspending on housing was due to the fact that there was more money budgeted than there was need, that would be fine. But that is not the case. Mr. Speaker, should we consider underspending in this area while there are many Nova Scotians in desperate need of affordable housing to be a balanced approach? Mr. Speaker, let's consider the health budget. In Halifax, conditions at the VG and Centennial buildings have been deplorable. In Shelburne, citizens are waiting on a new clinic. In Cape Breton, there were thousands of hours of ER closures last year. Yet the government underspent on its hospital infrastructure budget by $26.8 million. It underspent on its ER budget by almost $1 million. Mr. Speaker, again, if this money was underspent because of a lack of need, that would be great. But the need is there. Can
Order,
we consider
please. The honourable member for Dartmouth South has the floor.
Start right from the page.
Can we consider
Order,
this,
please.
Mr. Speaker?
Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth South has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we consider this to be a balanced approach to addressing health care needs in this province? Mr. Speaker, the budget for this year is just a continuation of the government's narrative. As we get closer to an election, we are now being told a different story. The different story than we were told in December. Can we believe this? Can we believe the projection that personal income tax revenue will rise by over $100 million this year? Can we believe that the government will even spend the money budgeted? Can Nova Scotians depend on this government to put the needs of the province ahead of its own austerity agenda? Speaking at the bill briefing for this act, the finance minister continued to try and highlight the financial prudence of this government by pointing to the $110 million in so-called revenue the government received from the municipal and federal government contributions to the Nova Centre, which the government will now use to create fiscal capacity. This money was always intended for paying down the debt associated with that project. Why did the minister not mention this $110 million in so-called revenue back in December, when he was telling Nova Scotians of the revenue problems of this province?
They hadn't made it up yet.
It is clear that the budget estimates for this province is a PR exercise, and it's used to try and solidify its narrative. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is my pleasure to say a few words on the Financial Measures Act and the budget. And I know that we have all spent the better part of the week discussing the budget, and certainly there's been a number of issues addressed in estimates and the question. There's some pretty big questions around the budget. Realize it represents a year's worth of work for the Department of Finance, and is probably the singular most important act of the government. This budget, the dispersing of the funds of the taxpayers in Nova Scotia, is a very serious duty on our part, and and on a part of the government, and it's an important, very important moment in the yearly cycle of this institution. Certainly, there's. I don't want to start to criticize without first saying something positive. Very pleased to see that the Farmers Food Bank tax credit is there, and surprised to see it retroactive to January 2015. And but that's also positive. It goes back a year, and I think it was just last year we were talking about that bill. So very pleased that that bill is retroactive. Kind of surprised at that it's retroactive, but very pleased. And certainly in the world of food, I know that I don't want to spend too much time talking about foods, but in my world that I came from, in the vegetable industry, is one industry which is very able to donate, and some of my vegetable farmer friends will be very pleased to see this tax credit here, given the nature of what the kind of food we produce does tend to be what the food banks want, and we're able to donate. And I think I've talked in this House before about how oftentimes when you're producing a crop, not everyone, and I know some of you may have noticed in France they've gone to ugly food. Sometimes things are just ugly and misshapen, and it's certainly all very good for the food bank and very good food, and also finding a market now. But this food bank tax credit, a bill that we introduced last year, a bill that I know that the members on the opposite side of the House have introduced in the past. I believe the now Minister of Health introduced that bill a number of years ago. Good to see that coming into fruition, so I'm very pleased about that. Just looking through some of the things that don't make the numbers, but in particular, but I guess I'm kind of a little bit surprised that a little bit concerned about the increase in tobacco taxes, not because I don't agree with increasing tobacco taxes, just that I question if we haven't reached the sort of point of where it's a zero-sum game. When we put a tax on, increase the tax on tobacco, we just drive a certain amount of that industry to the illegal market. And I know that in talking to some of the industry associations involved with selling tobacco products, that they believe that the contraband tobacco issue is a larger issue than the government thinks, and that every penny increased in taxes is a penny lost because it's going to the contraband issue. And I know that the members on the other side of the House, in particular the Minister of Business, is well aware of this, and we've had this conversation too. So will it result in increased revenue, or will it simply drive more tobacco consumption to the contraband market? And that is a big question in my mind about that sort of thing. As far as the budget itself goes, there's many questions about the budget. We've addressed a number of those questions, I know, in supply and in estimates. Obviously, the big question, which we have talked about before at length, is it really a surplus? And I know the numbers say it's a surplus. I can tell you that as a farmer, when if I booked something in the books on March 31st, if I put a $13 million hit in the books on March 31st, because my year end was April 1st to March 31st, so if I put that in last year's books, I didn't have any more money in my pocket this year. That's for sure. So whether it was in one year or the other, the costs are real, and in reality, there's some question about the accounting practices going on here in these books, in my opinion. And I know that I'm not an accountant, but what I do understand about accounting practices, you can't pick and choose when you apply the rules. If you're going to, the document needs to have a coherency to it, and that the where things are booked is the same for one department or the other, and I think that's quite important. Some of the issues with one of the big issues with this, and I know I hope to hear the Minister of Finance address this at some point. One of the big issues is some of the assumptions, and the Minister of Finance was asked in this House a while ago when this document first came out, why the whopping $108 million increase in personal tax revenue, and how is that justified? And In fact, we can do the math and show that if there's no personal income tax increase and wages are relatively flat, that would take 20,000 new people working in Nova Scotia to achieve that number, or some combination of those, some of those 20,000 and an increase in wages. So, or a growth in the, so those, does that seem likely? And to be frank with you, that we would like it to be true, certainly. We hope that it's true, but it's not clear that it is, and I don't know what a job creation budget would look like precisely, but it's not clear that it is a big job creation budget. Some of the big spending, the big ticket items, we're holding the line on some of the things in the budget. So it's a budget designed to produce a surplus, and usually that isn't, as far as I know, isn't one that is spending money on big ticket items and job increases. Certainly some of the things that have been done in the past will lead to that. So it's a very doubtful, it's a very rosy assumption, that $108 million assumption. And I know the Minister of Finance, when asked about that, said that number, that assumption came from Ottawa. So it's very easy to give, when you make a rosy assumption, to say it was somebody else's number. But in fact, I think that there's enough staff in the Minister's office that he has to own that number. That's his assumption. That's his staff's assumption. And I think it's a very questionable assumption, and it starts to sort of erode into $108 million excess in personal income tax. If that's not all there, even if it's 10% off, that's pretty well a big part of the budget surplus. And those types of things are very important, I believe, in the way that this budget is put together. Certainly, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I uncovered in estimates. I know I'll probably get the Minister of Business on his feet when I start talking about this, but I can tell you that on the very top line of the business budget, when I looked at senior management 2015-2016 estimate of $3,346,000, the actual of 2015-16 $2,676,000. The estimate for this coming year of $3,610,000. When I asked the Minister to explain that number, I was under the just thought that'll just take a second. All he's going to say is that this was FTEs, and they're approaching their approaching sort of what they had sort of what would be maybe considered a sort of a natural growth when they had been down a little bit the year before. And what the answer was that this was the number was largely a $1.1 million amortization on the Halifax Convention Centre. So scratch your head on that. How does a $1.1 million amortization on the Halifax Convention Centre enter into the senior management line of that? And you can look it up in Hansard. I think we spent better part of a half an hour figuring that out, and I'm not sure we did figure that out. And it causes me to doubt the, it sort of in a way casts doubt on the, and maybe it's because I'm not an accountant, I never quite understood that, but yet just down below there's Crown Corporations, there's a $76 million number for Crown Corporations, and if you flip to the Crown Corporations book, there's the Halifax Trade and Convention Centre, there's amortization, there's depreciation there. Those numbers rightly belong in that line, so it causes one to wonder about what's, I know that in accounting there's a term called GAAP, G-A-A-P, Generally Accepted Accounting Practices, and I'm not aware, and maybe some other colleague in the House can enlighten me, if amortization is normally included in the line for senior management when it clearly belongs in a Crown Corporation line. And I kind of have my opinion is that that's not really an accepted practice. Certainly, and it's kind of a head-scratching one. Why is it there? We were able to establish that, in fact, as is true with all amortization or depreciation, it's and the way that I can understand it is that on the farm, if we have a amortization or depreciation is when we recognize an asset. Say a tractor that was worth $20,000 is only worth $18,000 this year. It declines in value. So in reality, it's a non-cash figure, just a recognition of the decline in the value of the item. And this is it's not finished yet, as my colleague says. This is a non-cash item. In fact, that $1.1 million represents the estimate of February and March of 2017, 2 months of depreciation of $550,000. I will be very interested to see if next year's senior management line includes a some $7 million amortization figure. Then we would expect to see, if that accounting practice continues, we'd expect to see in that line item a jump up for the remaining amortization of 12 months worth of amortization instead of 2. We would expect to see a $7 million amortization line on senior management. Obviously, that's not really making a lot of sense from an accounting point of view, I think, and it belongs in the Crown Corporation line. But it casts some doubt on the numbers, and unfortunately, sometimes small things give you kind of an indication of the overall, or a sense of a little bit of unease about the overall document. And I doubt that was the intent of that, but it's just the reality of what happens. Another accounting puzzler in the Crown was in the Crown Corporations, which is the Nova Scotia Business Inc. Numbers, where we saw the film tax credit, the commitment for this past year of the, again it says here, Nova Scotia Film and TV Production Incentive Fund, the budget for 2015-16 shows 0, the actual for 2015-16 0, the budget for 2016-17 $10 million. At issue is the fact that there was some $3 million plus committed in the past year to a certain number of, and I should have the number on the top of my head, I'm not quite sure, but a certain number of television and film productions. Two, my colleague says. So the question is that money was committed last year but not spent, so it's not shown. So is it part of this year's commitment? So does that mean that the $10 million fund this year is actually a $7 million fund? Yes. And if that's the case, that sort of is sort of a hit to the film and TV, the film industry. It's very disappointing, and this has been a highly controversial, as everyone is well aware, the film industry and the cutting of the film tax credit last year at this time has been a very highly controversial issue. So this is not a small matter that this be shown this way, and the fact that the $10 million is not $10 million, possibly, or possibly it is $10 million. The minister was not totally clear. There was so 6.7 million, because I know the number is 3 point something, presumably 3.3. So this is a very serious issue in this document, and I know that if you have an expense, sometimes in accounting it is appropriate to say, well, we know we're going to expend that, we're going to have that expense next year, so we'll put it in the books next year. So, but the thing is, in a financial statement, you don't pick and choose when you do that. If you're going to do it one way, you got to do it that way the whole time. And if you're going to, you can't just pick and choose when you apply financial statement rules. You got to be consistent. And the issue becomes the Yarmouth Ferry. We have a certain amount of money that was booked on March 31st that's going to be spent in the coming year. So if we're going to do that, we can't. On the one hand, the Department of Business in the Nova Scotia Business Inc. statements is saying that money wasn't spent this year, it's going to be spent next year, so we're going to show it next year. On the other hand, with the ferry, we know that there was a $13 million expense booked in on the last day of the fiscal year, March 31st, 2016. Some of that money apparently was spent. There was, but 4 or 5 million of it, as I understand. I don't have the exact number in my head, but that wasn't spent. That is going to be spent. So we have a situation where we have a set of books here employing 2 different financial accounting rules, applying the rule of one way when it suits them and another way when it suits them. So in my experience, my auditor in Kentville wouldn't let me do that, and I'd have to I'd take my pick, do it one way or the other, and next year I'd have to do it the same way I did it last year. And this is not something in business that is normally done. This is something that if you're going to book it, you got to book it this year. You can't just pick and choose, and we see it in the statements here. And it is highly disconcerting that this is the case, especially when we're talking about two issues, which are these are not minor issues. These are highly controversial, have been the subject of much debate in the House. Certainly, the film industry. I know that at the same time that these statements have we've gotten the budget, we have the PricewaterhouseCoopers report. I can tell you. You may not want to hear this, but I can tell you that out in rural Nova Scotia, PricewaterhouseCoopers carries weight. People believe in that company. That company, if they said something, they don't. The public, that organization, that business, has credibility. And if they said that the film industry was paying its way, that the actual taxes coming in were covering the $24 million, the public believes that study, because they know that that's a very reputable accounting firm, and that's the reaction I'm getting from ordinary Nova Scotians. And we're very disappointed at the way that the film industry has been dealt with here, and continues to be dealt with that way in the way that this financial statement for Nova Scotia Business Inc. presents these numbers, in effect chopping off at the knees this film tax credit for 2016-17. And maybe it's a moot point. Maybe there'll only be another $3 million uptake on it, because clearly the program is not working. And at the time when we have a low Canadian dollar and the film industry is exploding across the country, we have a situation where this wasn't. We only had 33% uptake of the program, and it doesn't. With all the talent and all the ability we have here in Nova Scotia. To engage the film industry and what we did have going on, it's been a huge hit to our economy. And I can tell you that, and you may not want to hear this, but people in rural Nova Scotia have noticed this. This is a serious issue, and I think I remember hearing from the government side about a year ago when this was being discussed that if the changes to film tax credit didn't work out, the government would make an adjustment. I think I heard that at one point from someone on that side. And I'm just saying, at what point do we have to say, let's review this and let's take a look at it? We've got this PricewaterhouseCoopers report that tells us how big an impact the film industry made in the province. We have ordinary Nova Scotians in every one of our constituencies who worked in the film industry. I venture to say almost everybody knows somebody who worked in the film industry or benefited somehow from the film industry. To people like my friend Ken Bizanson in Port Williams, who was renting out antiques to the film industry. And there's a number, and there's other people I know who were doing the same things, and people in my constituency who were directors and soundstage people and all of this. And this industry has been chopped off at the knees in the past year, and this budget is further disturbing evidence that this is not changing. And I ask the question, when and at what level do you have to, what has to take place for you to say, yeah, that wasn't the right thing to do, we made a mistake, let's shift gears? And I think that at some point there's got to be a review of what's happening with the film industry vis-a-vis the rest of Canada, vis-a-vis this film and TV production fund, and where is this going? And is there $10 million there, or is there $6.7 million there? This has got to be answered. I know the minister said, and I heard him say in estimates, well, if the fund is tapped out, they'll look at it. But that's you know, what does that mean? Like, and what will happen there? And I know I think it's incumbent upon the minister to seriously go through the process of engaging the industry and see where it is, take a serious look at that PricewaterhouseCoopers report, and to ask yourselves, is this really where you want to see this industry going? an industry that brings in young people, that there was actually an enormous amount of pride associated with that industry among rural Nova Scotians that I know, and I don't know about the city, but when they saw their own community on TV, they were really proud. I know we had one shot in our neighborhood, Call Me Fitz, shot in New Minas, and people would see that show and be super proud that they could see New Minas on television. And Amelia Earhart was shot in Blomidon, parts of it, and people were just super proud. And I know people on the South Shore are the same way, that they're very proud of the fact that scenery from Nova Scotia, they're very proud of the film industry and how successful it's been, and the Book of Negroes, for example. And this is just a tragedy here in the documents. The tragedy continues. And at what point does the government say, well, let's do a study and see what the impact has been, and how are we going to fix this? And I just really question that. I really question that. Today, I was asking the Minister of Health questions about the books, health questions, and it wasn't really, and it's not my area of critic role, but I was shocked when I looked at this health infrastructure fund in the numbers here, and I really question what's going on here. In the 2015-16 estimate, there was budgeted $42,347,000, $42,347,000 for hospital infrastructure. And I know that most of you will have been in most of our hospitals, one or the other, but if you've been in the Centennial Building, you know that there's some pretty big demands on hospital infrastructure. Yet, for whatever reason, the actual spending on hospital infrastructure last year was $15,459,000. And I only had about 20 minutes to ask the minister questions, and I didn't have time to drill down into that number the way I would have liked to. I wanted to get on to some other issues more pertinent to Kings County, more local. But yet I was astonished when I read that there was some $30 million, nearly $30 million budgeted for hospital infrastructure that was not spent last year. Now, if there was 30, and it wasn't quite 30 million to be fair, doing quick math, $28 million in hospital infrastructure not spent. Now, I don't know what hospitals, like, I asked the minister to explain that. I think he explained it. He said some stuff, but I didn't understand the explanation, frankly. And I just asked myself, how is that possible? And how is that possible that this government could, with the state of some of our hospitals, choose to not spend the budgeted money? Was there no demand for that? Was there nobody asking for that? And I'm kind of amazed at that number, like that there would be that much. And I can tell you that one of the contexts, what drew me, and this is literally the only number I looked at in this whole hospital section of health and wellness, in the whole health and wellness budget, that's the only line I looked at. What drew me to that line was the fact that we have in the Annapolis Valley, and I have a good friend in this situation who needs dialysis. He's not a candidate for a transplant, unfortunately, and he has to travel to Halifax 3 times a week. He cannot travel alone because I think he's not allowed to drive back alone, but it's a hour and a quarter drive in and a 4, 5, 6 hour dialysis session, and then to drive back, and dialysis is quite hard on you. It would be terrific if we had dialysis in Kentville. There's a press release, I believe it's dated December of 2013, where the Minister of Health indicates in the press release dialysis is coming to the Valley Regional Hospital, to Kentville. Terrific. We're told in December 2013 we're getting dialysis in the Valley. But I can tell you that right now, as of this week, Peter's in the Valley, doesn't live more than a kilometre from the hospital, but he's coming down to Halifax. We still don't have dialysis in the Valley. I pointed out to the minister, I asked the minister if there were any concrete plans. I didn't really get a real clear answer. Then I pointed out to the minister that the capital plan for 2016-17 shows dialysis coming to the Valley, but I didn't really get that definitive statement. I said, show me the number. And he drew me to this one line in this book. If there was some $27, $28 million in this budget for capital infrastructure, couldn't we have had dialysis in the Valley last year? Like, if that was really there waiting to be spent, I guess I should have brought it to his attention a little earlier. I feel like I lost an opportunity there. And we have, in the Valley, we have a hospice, fundraising for a hospice that's been completed for 2 years now. The community raised $8 million. It was based on an agreement with the then District Health Authority, which now no longer exists, of course. So this is an MOU with an organization that no longer exists, but this was intended, I believe, to be matching funding, and I understand from what the minister has told me there's some issues with operational funding and some things to work out. I understand that. This was done 2 years ago. The fundraising was completed 2 years ago, and we're still waiting for the hospice. If there was $28 million in the budget to be spent on hospital infrastructure, wouldn't it have been good to have that money spent? I see the anyway. And I question those numbers. In fact, I was flabbergasted this afternoon when I saw those numbers. I hadn't really realized those numbers were there, and I was shocked. And I realized that as you go through a year, I know as a farmer we make plans to do certain things, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. You don't get it done for one reason or another. But I have to believe that a $10 billion enterprise has to have more integrity of purpose. In other words, if it's in the plan, if it's in the budget, it has to be done. And if it isn't done, there has to be a good reason. We just can't be putting things down and then changing our minds. And this is one of the things I have a problem with this budget. Where is how confident can I be that if it's $34 million in this year's estimate that we won't be spending $10 million and being some $20 million off this year? This kind of stuff just makes you really kind of scratch your head. And it brings up another issue, which I believe is highly pertinent to the budget too, and that is the Auditor General's report. And I've mentioned this already in the House. There were a number of recommendations in the Auditor General's report about financial management. And the Auditor General's report lists those from 2012 to 2013 as not complete. This is a report published in April 20th, I believe, is the date that this report was published. In other words, just a few days ago, just last month. And I know I've heard the Minister of Finance say that this, in some cases, some of these things are done now, because this represents the Auditor General obviously couldn't have just finished looking at this in April. It takes time to get a report finished, I understand that. But there's some pretty big issues in this Auditor General's report that relate to finances and accounting. And I have just laid out a few of these issues that I see as a non-expert. I see in this document, and to me, some of this just goes right back to what the Auditor General was recommending, and things that are listed as not complete. And I can tell you that I am really kind of shocked at the fact that the Auditor General's reports, especially the ones that relate to financial accounting and so on, have not been done. And some of them, I don't know if, I know some of you will be familiar that with, if I say ISO 9001, ISO 9000, stuff like that. This is stuff that has gone through the business world where there's sort of verification programs, quality assurance programs that involve documentation of procedures. And sort of, they kind of establish quality control process. And to me, when I read the Auditor General's report, it reads like an ISO 9001 type of document where a lot of the recommendations the Auditor General has given relate to the quality control and quality of management, and a lot of them would relate directly to these statements. And this is stuff that is the business world has adapted to. And how come government can't make that adopt these? How come government can't address these issues? Why are these things not complete? And it first came up for me when I looked at and I know I've asked the question of the Minister of Business in the House about this. The Department of Business has a 3% compliance rate with Auditor General reports. 3%. And that is a shockingly low rate of compliance. And when I asked the Minister of Business about this, he said that it was that low because they had a disagreement with the Auditor General. In other words, the Minister of Business disagreed with the Auditor General about some of the recommendations. And to be fair to the Minister of Business, there are some that I can read and I can say, yes, I can agree with, I can see your point, because some of the recommendations relate to ERDT and the Jobs Fund. And the Jobs Fund is no longer, of course, and is another topic that I don't want to forget to talk about, but the Jobs Fund is, of course, the last government's business development fund, and it's quite clear that some of the recommendations which relate to applications, the applications to the Jobs Fund, that is clear that is no longer applicable. But when I read the report, the Auditor General's report, in every place where it says it is not complete, and many of it says in brackets, it says the Auditor General does not agree with this assessment. So I think that, and as I said, a lot of this stuff relates to quality control, in my opinion, of process and quality control, of just ensuring that the documentation is in place. And this is pretty standard stuff in industry. And in my world, where I come from, I don't come from, well, I can give you an example of pretty big business. I was involved in a insurance company, and King's Mutual Insurance in Berwick was a very, very well-run company. And after the Enron scandal, the financially regulated companies of our country started to adopt new policies and procedures to address some of those issues. And to me, this reads very similar to the types of things that have been gone through the financial industry and private and financially regulated institutions like our banks and our insurance companies, where we need to have a very high level of confidence in the quality of the books and in the quality of the security there. If you're investing money in a bank, you want to know that that money's secure. These types of things, these institutions and businesses have dealt with stuff like this and addressed it. And I can tell you that if we in that business had received recommendations in 2012, 2013, we would have made sure that they were done in 2014, like expeditiously as possible, and in a way that not simply rubber stamped it, but that truly addressed the heart of the matter, while taking into account the realities of the operation. So there's a number of recommendations in this Auditor General's report related to ERDT and to the Department of Finance, which have not been done. And some of them relate to, in reality, when you read them, they relate to how financial projections are made. So when we go back to the $108 million financial projection, would it have made any difference if the Auditor General's report had been adopted and there had been a little bit more quality control on that projection? Well, I don't know that, but I would like to know if the Auditor General thinks there's an issue with the way the Department of Finance is making projections and it could be improved. I would like to think that if we're here spending time talking about this budget, that should have been done. That should have been addressed. And I know the Minister of Finance said some of these things have been addressed already. I hope that one has been. But the Auditor General's report shows that it's not been done yet. And in the Department of Business with ERDT, the Department of Business is responsible for that Jobs Fund. When you look at the Jobs Fund numbers, there's a pretty big swing in, I'll get that page and just read you that. Last year, the estimate for the cost of the Jobs Fund was $37,523,000. That was the estimate of how much money the province would put out to I believe it's over 100 companies that during the NDP government had received a commitment. And as a government, I believe, and of course we have to honour our commitments, but a commitment and had qualified for this Jobs Fund. The Jobs Fund will go on for another 28 years. So management of this Jobs Fund is going to be something that 27 years from now, who's ever in this House is still going to be talking about it, and they're probably going to be going, this is the last year, thank goodness. But, and maybe, you know, some of those, and I don't want to throw all those companies under the bus in that. They're just reacting to a government program, and I trust that some of them will, most of them, I hope, will give us a fair, good return for the money, and I'm sure that if there's some truly successful ones in that, my NDP colleagues will let us know. But this is what this is. Don't worry, we will. You will. Now, in the Auditor General's report, there's a number of recommendations about the Jobs Fund. In the Auditor General's report, there's a number of recommendations from 2012, 2013 relating to the Jobs Fund to ERDT, and obviously some of them are about applications, but some of them are about ensuring that the process of controlling the outflow of money, did they meet all the program guidelines? Was there third-party evaluation of the Jobs Fund? Well, if we put out we projected that we were going to put out $37 million. I hope that on a $37 million expenditure there would be third-party audits. And that's one of the recommendations which was not done. I would hope that there would be management of that. And what's shocking to me is on last year's numbers, $37 million worth of estimate, the actual was $44 million. So that's a pretty big swing on, that's a $7 million swing on the Jobs Fund last year. Now, how does the Jobs Fund, we've got some pretty good bureaucrats, I assume. How do we get a $7 million swing on a number like that? How come we don't know what that number is? We should have known that. That should be predictable. We should know approximately what those numbers are to within plus or minus 5%, but we're talking about, I would say, close to a 20% swing there. I'd have to do the math on that, but there's a pretty big jump. And I kind of scratch my head at that and say, how is that possible that we couldn't estimate, how is it possible the actual expenditure of the Jobs Fund is $7 million more than the estimate? The answer lies in two pretty high-profile bankruptcies. And to be fair, maybe bankruptcies are tough to know if that's going to happen. I know if a company's going bankrupt, the last thing they want anybody to know is that they're actually going bankrupt. So they're probably hiding that a little bit until it actually happens. So I can appreciate that, to be fair. But on the other hand, the Auditor General calls for third-party on-site visits and third-party audits of this. That's what the Auditor General calls for in the report for ERDT, which bears the responsibility, which the new Department of Business is now bearing the responsibility for. And when I asked the Minister of Business this question, how come we can do this? He said this was being done by NSBI. Maybe it is, but in the books, it shows it's the responsibility of the Department of Business. In the books, it shows the Department of Business bears this responsibility. This number does not show up in NSBI. So when I read the financial statements, and maybe to be fair to the Minister, maybe NSBI is doing it, maybe all the things have been addressed, well, then there's a problem in the books. And I already addressed a couple of accounting problems I feel that are in the books, and maybe there's more, I don't know. I'm not enough of an accountant, but to me, if that's what the Auditor General's report says, then that's what should have been done. And I think that's a big issue. Mr. Speaker, I can certainly keep going, but right now I'd like to move to adjourn debate.
Motion is for adjournment. Is it agreed? It is agreed. We'll now turn it over to the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in the category of further surprises, that concludes the government's business for today. We will meet again tomorrow between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., at which time we will call Government Business Committee of the whole House on Supply, and if time permits, bills for second reading, Bill number 174, the continuation of that debate, as well as public bills for third reading, 149, 152, 154, 156, 157, 158, 160, 161, 162, 165, 168, and such other government business as may arise. That I move for adjournment.
Motion is for adjournment for the House to rise tomorrow between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. That's Friday, May the 6th. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until tomorrow, Friday, May the 6th at 9 a.m.